Max Verstappen and Red Bull's dominance over the past 2 years has been nothing short of historical. Having won 18 races this year, most recently, of course, in the past weekend at Las Vegas, and probably heading for a 19th race win in Abu Dhabi, it's really starting to look like this record probably isn't going to be broken anytime soon. Unless Red Bull pull a fast one on all of us and end up winning 20 races with Max next year, which, let's be honest, is probably very possible. But can we really expect anybody in 2024 to get anywhere close to Red Bull, much less match them and be competitive? I mean, as a neutral in the game, I'm not really a big Red Bull fan myself, but I'm not exactly a big Red Bull hater. It would just be nice to give them something to think over and strategize about, or even just sweat a little bit about next year heading into 2024. Now, in terms of the options, there is a few people that are on the list, and most people would probably say the best ones primed to probably make a jump and catch Red Bull, or, give them something to think about, like I said before, would be Mercedes. And I think that's probably a sensible option. They certainly have the drivers and the backing to be able to do it. My main issue is that with key figures leaving recently, such as James Vowles going to Williams and, some of the main engineers leaving, and with it taking 2 years for them to sort of get rid of this concept car that they brought to the new regulations last year, it's going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, for them to make a huge leap up unless they've really found the formula to success and are just holding all the cards close to the chest before the end of this year. Now, it's by no means a guarantee that they'll make that jump. Obviously, they're probably the best primed with probably the best lineup outside of, probably anybody. Maybe Ferrari might be able to match them closely, but they do have the best driver lineup. Of course, they've got probably among the best facilities, if not the best facilities on the grid, to try and make that car what they want it to be. But for me, my main issue is at the moment is there is such a gap to Red Bull for Mercedes, and if they're going to a Red Bull-esque type concept, they're probably not going to have the full understanding of it until next year, or at least some part of the way into next year, and they're probably going to be playing catch-up, much like Red Bull had to do during the Mercedes era of dominance. So we'll have to wait and see if Mercedes can do it. In terms of other options, others may well say McLaren. I mean, it's obviously been a very impressive year for McLaren, despite the sort of tragic start that they had at the start of the year. And with the big sort of jump in performance they had from around sort of Baku onwards, and obviously mega performances in Silverstone and all the podiums Lando has got, and then Piastri winning the sprint race in Qatar, clearly there's a lot to come from McLaren. And, of course, I've mentioned the two drivers there. Norris and Piastri are a fantastic lineup to take on into the future. Of course, Lando's contract is up in the next season or two, so we'll have to see how that one plays out, because, of course, he might end up going to Red Bull. He's certainly one of the main options for them. But that's not to even mention the brand new facilities that they've got going at the moment. They've got a brand new wind tunnel, which they've been working on for the past 4 years, and now no longer have to rely on the Toyota wind tunnel over in Germany to have to build the car with. So having everything in-house is probably going to streamline the process, make everything easier in terms of upgrading the car. Building cars will be a lot easier for them, and they'll be able to just, manage that whole process a lot more efficiently, which hopefully means more performance to come out of the car. But with all that being said, my main problem with McLaren is whether or not they're able to sustain this going into next year. I certainly hope so. Of course, I'm wearing the McLaren t-shirt, so that tells you, for one thing, I'm a McLaren fan. But for me, the proof is obviously going to have to be in the pudding. They're going to have to show us that they can sustain that. If they start off next year in the top sort of 3 or 4 cars, then clearly they've been able to hold on to that performance that they've garnered over the past half of the season, and that they'll be able to maintain that and maybe improve the car to a point where maybe they might be able to catch Red Bull a little bit sooner and maybe give them something to worry about a little bit earlier on in the season. Do I expect McLaren to be championship contenders? Probably not, but I do certainly expect them to be in and around the podiums next year if they can hold on to that performance and come out with a cracking car for next year. Which leads me to my final and really most worthy option of who is able to catch up to Red Bull next year. And to some, it may seem a surprise, and some might laugh, and some might think I'm actually being genuinely honest here. But for me, the most likely option is Ferrari. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Really? Has Ferrari got the ability to do that? And for me, I think more so than the back end of last year, I think the answer is yes. Now, out of all the teams I've mentioned, and of course we can throw in Aston Martin and Alpine, the mess that they are currently at the moment, who knows what's going on with them. Ferrari, I think, for me, is the best placed. Despite this year not exactly being a stellar year for Ferrari, they did get a race win, of course, Sainz being the only non-Red Bull race winner this year. I think it's really been a year of stabilization for them. You think of the sort of high that they started out in 2022 at the start of that sort of year with Binotto and Leclerc winning races and still being competitive through the first half of the year and then sort of tailing off with disastrous decisions, whether it's strategy or car development or anything like that. 2022 really wasn't the year for Ferrari. They obviously made the change for Vasseur to come in, and he's, for me, has done a good job. He has done an excellent job. He hasn't exactly leapt them up to the point where they're catching Red Bull, but the past few races, you've seen Ferrari put in pole laps. You've seen them be really competitive with the Red Bull. You've seen them a few seconds behind by the end of races. So for me, they've got to a point now where they've not necessarily caught up to Verstappen and Red Bull, but they've got to a point where they can say, look, a bit more performance if we can have a really good winter, and Red Bull maybe don't make a huge leap that like we would probably expect them to do. We should be in and around Red Bull's pace to be able to make it something of a challenge for them next year. The other thing that I think we have to take into consideration is the fact that, Leclerc is starting to show that form again. He's not exactly been out of form all year. He's been in and around the top four for the most part of the season. Like, if you look at his results, top four has sort of been the consistent position for him. Has he had that many podiums? No, but fourth is sort of the best of the rest, really. And when you consider that, Red Bull and McLaren for the second half of the year have really been sort of dominating the podiums, it's really been up to Ferrari to try and pick up the most of the rest of those points. And I think Leclerc and Sainz have done a pretty good job of doing that. Now, if they can give them a car where the pace is there to match Red Bull, and I think they'll be able to get relatively close. I think they'll easily beat Perez in the current form that he's in, although he has started to sort of bridge that gap a little bit and start to find a little bit more regular form towards the end of this year. On the past couple of races, I should say. Obviously, let's forget about Mexico because that was a bit of a tragedy for him. I think that Ferrari, with the drivers they've got in this current shape of form, and with Leclerc and Sainz both ending their contracts at the end of next year, you're going to have a fully motivated driver lineup to try and get the most out of the car, as well as to catch up to Red Bull. And I think Vasseur has done the right thing this year in terms of trying to stabilise everything. Of course, Ferrari want to be in first position and getting podiums left, right and centre. But realistically, was that realistic this year? Probably not. But I do think that Leclerc has definitely sort of simmered down with Vasseur's appointment, and I think he is overall more content. You've, of course, got Sainz, who's a very safe pair of hands as a second driver. Again, he'll probably contend he's not the second driver because he has more points than Leclerc this year. But really, when you have the fastest car that you can possibly get out of Ferrari, who are you going to trust to match up with Max? It's probably Charles. And what I would love to see Ferrari go and do is a similar thing to what Red Bull did at the end of 2020, which was go and win Abu Dhabi and sort of lay a marker down to say, right, this is where we are, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we go after Mercedes. This is the sort of the marker of the next step in our journey to try and get that world championship, either for the driver or for the constructor. Is that likely to happen? Probably not. But Red Bull obviously are looking very quick at the minute and still looking good. Max wants to win every single race that he possibly can. So for me, Red Bull is probably going to win this race, but Ferrari should probably be aiming for those podium spots. And without anything really majorly happening in the race, we'll probably finish second and third because, again, can Perez reliably finish third again? Who knows? It's really up to him at this point. But for me, in comparison to all the other teams, Ferrari have a much more solid base to build, especially when you compare it to last year, like I mentioned before. They just need to put those pieces together, and I think for me, they could be a hell of an outfit next year. If they can just get the car right, then they'll be there or thereabouts with Red Bull, I reckon. Now, with all that being said, I still do think it's going to take a mega effort for anyone to really get up to the peak of Red Bull at the moment, or even get close to them. But even if Red Bull do win it all next year, it would be nice just at least to make them sweat. Now, let me know in the comments, what do you think of next year and how it's shaping up? Do you think Ferrari or anyone else for that matter could catch up to them? Or do you think Red Bull are going to dominate again? Do you think Red Bull could maybe beat that 18, potentially 19 race record for Verstappen and get 20 races for wins for Verstappen? Let me know in the comments. As always, I've been Grimmy. This is Taking the Pits, and I'll see you soon.